being here. Could I just say thank you very much to Wally Edwards, who is, as you know, a legendary cricketer and was a former chairman of Cricket Australia, has represented our country and his state in cricket at the very highest levels, and he's translated that success into an amazing operation here at Holman's. It's obviously a household name, and when people go into a Bunnings or they go into other stores across the country, if they're renovating or as builders, they see this product and they know that it's a reliable product. And to hear the success story here, the building from a garage into a major international player in this space is something that we should all be very proud of. And as Tom pointed out before, though, for businesses, we were in New South Wales the other day where a local grocery shop was paying an extra $40,000 a month in electricity. Now, that's passed on to consumers, and that's why we're seeing businesses as well as households paying so much more for their electricity, for their gas, and that's why food is up by 30% under the Albanese government. And the Treasurer wants to tell Australians that it's all over and done with, that the fight against inflation is all done and that we're turning the corner. That's not the experience of families. People know that the Labor Party, in concert with the Greens, if that's what happens, there is a Labor-Greens government after the election, that the spending will continue, that interest rates go back up again in that inflationary environment. And it's harder for businesses here and right across WA to succeed. I'm really proud to be here today to make a very significant announcement. The WA economy can't survive, manufacturing can't survive, electricity can't be produced without gas in the system. And Tanya Plibersek has taken a decision to be the Minister for no mining, because it makes her popular and it makes Anthony Albanese popular with Green voters in inner city Sydney and Melbourne. And the Labor government, under Anthony Albanese and Tanya Plibersek and Chris Bowen, have taken a decision to abandon WA, to put in place all sorts of processes and roadblocks to stop projects from taking place. Why? Why would they destroy jobs and economic activity in WA? Because they want to chase Green votes in inner city Sydney and Melbourne. And I think West Australians are smart enough to realise that they're being duped by a Prime Minister who is no Mark McGowan, no Roger Cook, and frankly, he's a Prime Minister that is against mining and is against agriculture and is against development. And our announcement today to deal with the North West Shelf gas extension decision within 30 days should send a very clear message that our government would be a very different, provide a very different future for Western Australians than what Labor Greens government would do. I'm seeking a mandate from the Australian people, and in particular from the people of Western Australia, to make sure that we can keep mining going and to make sure that we can keep investments and approval processes flowing, because without it, there are no jobs. And if we shut down the WA economy, as Tanya Plibersek is trying to do, then it will be devastating not just for this local economy, but for our national economy as well. It was comical yesterday to see Jim Chalmers refusing to mention the word $275. This is a Prime Minister and a Treasurer who promised before the election on 97 occasions that they would provide price relief, a price reduction of $275 per year on people's electricity bill. Now, 3 years almost at the end of this terrible term of government, the Treasurer refuses to even mention that word. So how could you believe anything that Jim Chalmers says going into the next election? If they didn't deliver on their last promises, how can you believe them on the promises that they're making this time around? A coalition government will get our country back on track. We will lower inflation, we'll make our community safer, we will provide an economic environment where people can invest again. We'll help young Australians achieve the dream of home ownership, and we will address Labor's cost of living crisis that they've created. There's a lot of work to do in cleaning up a Labor mess, but we're certainly able to do it. We've proven in the past, as John Howard did when he came in after Paul Keating's period, that we can clean up a Labor mess, and that's what we'll do, and we'll get our country back on track through good economic decisions and good decisions that will create jobs and industry here in the powerhouse of our national economy. And if the WA economy is faltering because of bad decisions driven by the Greens in Canberra, then that is a very bad day for WA and our country. I'm very happy to take any questions.
This North West Shelf policy seems to be kind of predicated on the department coming back with a yes once you force them to come back with it? What if they come back with a no for the North West Shelf extension?
Well, I just want to be very clear about where we're at. So the WA government has gone through its processes and considered the application. That's gone on for 6 years. Now, there is a lot of information, obviously, that's duplicated between the federal and state processes. But after 6 years, the Cook government has given approval for this extension. There is no conceivable reason as to why approval can't be given, except if you've got a minister who is beholden to Green voters in inner city Sydney and Melbourne and putting the interests of those Green voters over the interests of WA. That won't be an experience of our government. We will have a strong minister in John O'Donnell, and we will make sure that this approval is arrived at in 30 days, and we will make sure that there can be certainty about electricity production and make sure that there is certainty about the underpinning of the energy market here in Western Australia so that businesses like this can grow. I want to see Holman's double in size. I want to see a mining boom here in WA. I don't want to see our country go backwards under a Labor Greens government, and Tanya Plibersek as the Minister for No Mining in a Labor Greens government would be a disaster. Now, the other disaster here in WA is Kate Chaney, who is opposed to this gas extension and is lining up further to the left than the Labor Party. Kate Chaney is in lockstep with the Greens, and Kate Chaney means a reduction in economic activity in this state, a reduction in jobs, and I believe very strongly that if we can get Tom White elected into the seat of Curtin, we can prevent a minority Labor government with the Greens and the Teals, which would be a disaster, not just for the people of Curtin, but for every person who's in business and every person who's working in a business here in Western Australia.
Mr. Dutton, do you know the results of those unreleased monitorings by Woodside and the government, the ones that Ms. Plibersek's apparently contemplating right now? And if you don't, what level of damage would sway you if there is a level of damage that would sway
Well, look, I think we can take comfort in what the Cook government's gone through, and the Labor government here in WA. They're not a cowboy outfit, and if there was credible environmental concerns on the table, surely the Cook government wouldn't have approved this extension. After 6 years and going backwards and forwards, testing all of these claims, don't fall for this con job that's coming out of Anthony Albanese and Tanya Plibersek. It's all about them trying to hold seats from the Greens in Sydney and Melbourne. That's what it's about. There are not legitimate environmental concerns here. They've been dealt with by the Cook government. This is all about how do they win votes in the next election. It's why they've abandoned the Jewish community. It's why they've stopped supporting the salmon farming industry in Tasmania, even though it's sustainable and it's the lifeblood of the local economy there. It's the reason that they have abandoned sheep farmers here in WA. It's all about votes in Sydney and Melbourne from the Greens. That's what it is. So don't fall for this two-card trick from a bad minister and somebody who is obviously at war with the Prime Minister. The dynamic in the Labor Party at the moment is dysfunctional, and we will restore integrity to the process. We will get the investments flowing, because if we don't, the pipeline in WA is going to dry up, and that would be a disaster for jobs, and it would be a disaster for our international reputation, and that's not something that we would abide as a coalition government.
Is this an admission, though, that gas has a much more prominent role in the WA economy than nuclear could have under your plan?
Well, again, this is an interesting question, because 12 months ago, Tanya Plibersek and Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese wouldn't mention the word gas. Gas was a fossil fuel, it was evil. Now they realise that we're not keeping the lights on without significant gas supply into the system. And this is an announcement by us today which recognises that, yes, under our plan, nuclear is 44% cheaper than the government's renewables-only policy. But in the interim, we can bring down prices if we increase the gas supply. I don't want to temper demand, because that means that you're shrinking the economy and that you're reducing economic activity and jobs. But that's the Labor plan, because they're against mining, and Tanya Plibersek is more interested in what's happening in her seat in Sydney. We are a government, if we're elected, which will strongly support the WA mining sector. We will make sure that projects are approved in a timely way, and 6 years in and of itself is a long time, a lot of holding costs and a lot of expense. And I don't think anyone is accusing, not even Anthony Albanese, is accusing Roger Cook of fudging the environmental considerations that have been taken in relation to this project. I think the Prime Minister is against, obviously, this project from proceeding. And if you think that it's going to be more likely that the extension is granted if there is a Labor-Greens government, you're kidding yourself. I mean, they're trying to get through the election and then they will deliver the hammer blow to the WA economy, and that will mean less jobs and less economic activity in a state where the national economy falters without great success here in WA.
What is the point of a Commonwealth approval system, though, if you're just pointing to state approval saying, well, got the green light here, that's good enough for us on this project? What's the point, more broadly, of any Commonwealth approval?
Well, the point more broadly is that we don't want a duplication of process, because ultimately what happens it's not just mining, it's in relation to land development as well, where Tanya Plibersek's holding up a number of projects, which is part of the reason Labor's created this housing crisis where young Australians can't get into housing. So what's happened in that sense is that the environmental approvals have been given for these land development projects to take place, and Tanya Plibersek is stalling on those as well. Now, there's a legitimate place for some consideration, but not for duplication, because if you end up having an approval process that used to take 12 or 18 months, that's now taking 6 or 12 years, well, all that happens is that people end up paying another $40,000 or $50,000 for a block of land. And I want young Australians to be able to afford to get into home ownership. The government has this policy of having a build to rent for life model, which I think is a disaster for the young families and young Australians who want a roof over their head to be able to raise a kid or children and to have a good life in retirement. The Labor Party is siding with the environmentalists in inner city Sydney and Melbourne because that's where their battleground is. Their battleground is against the Greens. And so they're being dragged further and further to the left. And Tanya Plibersek and Anthony Albanese and Kate Chaney would be a disaster for WA and for our country. Yeah.
Are you worried dissidents like Kevin Yam might be pressured into returning to Hong Kong after letters were sent in Melbourne asking for his whereabouts?
Well, I am very worried about this, and I think the Prime Minister should provide a national update in relation to what action, if any, the government's taken. I think it is deeply concerning where a foreign power is trying to influence somebody here in Australia. It's against Australian law, and every effort should be made by the Albanese government to deal with the issue and to deal with it promptly. And I think the Prime Minister owes an explanation to the Australian public, and I hope that explanation is provided sooner than later.
Just on the North West Shelf issue, is it possible, though, by seeking to expedite that decision one way or another, then it can be mired in legal challenges going forward by those activists, as you described?
No, I don't think we see that risk at all. There's already a national interest test within the Act now. Tanya Plibersek just chooses not to use it, again because this is not about environmental concerns. This is about political gain, and Tanya Plibersek is stopping the gas extension from going ahead in WA, and Kate Chaney's urging her to stop it, because they're more worried about Green votes than they are about jobs within the mining sector here in Western Australia.
Mr Dutton, on your proposal for a referendum that would allow ministers to deport dual nationals who have committed a crime, are you concerned that in the public's eye this approach aligns you too closely with some of the policies of Donald Trump? No,
when I was Minister for Home Affairs, I cancelled visas of about 6,000 people who were non-citizens, so they were here on a tourist visa, they were here on a visa otherwise, and these are people who had committed sexual offences against children. They were involved in drug importation or distribution and wrecking the lives of young Australians. They were people who were involved in terrorist activities. They were people who were involved in outlaw motorcycle gangs, who are probably the most evil networks of criminal enterprise in our country. And I cancelled those visas, and it made our country a safer place. Now, under Labor, they've really turned that tap off. They've allowed those criminals to stay in Australia, and we're a less safe place. So I would say to all Australians that what I want to do is to keep you and your family safe, and I want to keep our country safe and secure. And if the laws aren't adequate to do that, then I will deal with the laws, and I will put in place a regime that reduces crime in our country and keeps us safe in a very uncertain century. The fact is that the Prime Minister, when faced with this question, would you cancel the citizenship of somebody who had committed a terrorist act or somebody who had committed acts of sexual abuse against 15 children? I mean, is the Prime Minister suggesting that that person should stay on as an Australian citizen? My role as Prime Minister will be to keep Australians safe, and I've demonstrated that through my career as a police officer, where I had a particular focus on protecting women and children, and as a Minister, where I demonstrated where we set up the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, that I fought hard to keep kids safe, and I'm going to do that as a Prime Minister. And I want a mandate from the Australian people to be able to implement the laws which are necessary to keep us safe. The Prime Minister dismisses it as a thought bubble. So we're suggesting here that if we can tighten the laws, we do that as a last resort. If there's a change to the Constitution required, we can have that discussion. But our Prime Minister is not mature enough, and obviously is completely out of his depth when it comes to these discussions. But the Prime Minister is suggesting that somebody who has committed multiple offences against children, sexual abuse, pedophilia, that person deserves to stay here as an Australian citizen if they could be stripped of their citizenship. I won't tolerate that situation, and I will do whatever it takes to keep women and children in our country safe. And if the Prime Minister doesn't have that same position, he should make it clear to the Australian public, because I think there are plenty of people at the moment who are worried about what's happening in their local neighbourhood, what's happening with the CFMEU, where they've run riot across the economy, they've driven up the cost of housing, they have crushed the construction sector, businesses have gone broke, there have been assaults by CFMEU officials of women. The footage that we saw was horrific on 60 Minutes of a male CFMEU official kicking and physically abusing a female CFMEU official. And the Prime Minister doesn't condemn it because, as we know, the Labor government received about $12 million of donations from the CFMEU. I find it completely and utterly astounding that the Prime Minister can't stand up for the rule of law in our country.
Can I just ask on Curtin?
Yes, mate.
Talking about gas. A lot of the other teal seats, obviously not exactly the preferred energy mix on the East Coast. Do you see Curtin as a bit of a unique battle against the teals in Western Australia in terms of Western Australians being more open to gas?
A couple of points. I think most Australians realise that we need to have stable electricity, and our plan is to underpin the renewables in our system, which are important and will remain, but we need to underpin it with a permanent 24/7 power source. Now, the Prime Minister wants you to believe that that's going to be green hydrogen, but people will end up paying 3, 4, 5 times the price of electricity that they're paying now. That is a disaster. Businesses will close, and manufacturers like this will say, we can't afford to operate in Australia. We'll just go to Malaysia, and we lose the jobs. And I think people in Curtin and people in Kooyong and people in Wentworth and North Sydney elsewhere, Australians aren't stupid, and they know that when the Prime Minister promised a $275 reduction in people's power prices, he wasn't going to deliver it. And now he and the Treasurer won't even mention that figure of $275. It's a disaster. And we've seen a threefold increase in the number of manufacturers who have left our shores over the last couple of years. So I think people in Curtin were duped at the last election when they heard Kate Chaney say that she was a disaffected Liberal. Kate Chaney is a hardcore Green, and I don't believe that the people of Curtin want Kate Chaney to continue with this process of deception. I think in Tom White you've got somebody who is credible, somebody who has achieved in his life, somebody who has worked hard and will be a great ambassador and a great advocate and a fierce fighter for his local electorate when he gets to Canberra. And that, I think, is very important.
What's the significance of Canada's decision to take Australia's Jindalee over-the-horizon radar technology for its northern missile defence system?
Well, we want a vibrant defence industry. That's important in WA and South Australia and Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, right across the country. And there is a huge play for us in the defence industry space. But the problem is that the Prime Minister says that we live in the most precarious period since the Second World War, and then he takes $80 billion out of defence. Again, I don't think the Prime Minister's up to it. I don't think he's up to his job, and I don't think he can deal with the issues around national security. So Canada is an important Five Eyes partner to us. Australia and the US through the ANZUS Alliance and AUKUS, particularly Pillar 2 of AUKUS, is our most important partner, and I believe that we can work very closely with a number of partners, including obviously the US, the UK, Canada, New Zealand and others, and I think it's very important for us to do so. Sorry, last one. Yep.
Just on citizenship,
Yeah.
the coalition's flagged adding a question on anti-Semitism. Should getting it wrong mean it's an automatic fail?
Well, I think what we should ask people to do when they become Australian citizens is sign up to the greatest country in the world. And if you give a pledge of allegiance to our country and it turns out that you hate our country or you want to harm people in our country, what should be the consequence? So the Prime Minister seems to think that that's not an issue. So our argument is that we have millions of people who have migrated to our country who are amazing Australians, and we should celebrate more, frankly, in our country the great migrant story. But we should make it clear that when people come here to our country, we want people to adhere to the rule of law, and we want people to be treated equally who are already here in our country, not to be discriminated against because of their religion or because of the skin colour or because of the religious affiliation or because of their political affiliation. And I think it's time for us to assert our values and make sure that people hear very clearly that not only are we in the best country in the world, we're going to make sure that that's the case into the future, and we can only do that if there is a coalition government elected after the election. And I will always stand up for Australians, and I treat everybody equally, and I believe that that's what every Australian would expect of each other. So that's the approach that we've taken. Thank you very much.
Standing on the
Thank
table
you.
under a coalition government?